Welcome to week 3 of Library Advocacy Unshushed. First, I'll just do a quick review of week 2. Last time we looked at perceptions of libraries, and we saw that generally libraries are well loved and well used. We also saw that there is a lot that people don't know about libraries. Even frequent users don't know, for example, how many dimensions of library service they can use. And most people don't know the impact of libraries and librarians on the lives of individuals and on the social and economic life of their communities. Remember also that in advocacy, we are not talking about promoting use because there's no direct connection between use and support. In looking at the evidence of advocacy, we are not looking, therefore, at promotional campaigns to sign up new members or to promote new services or efforts to raise the image of libraries or librarianship. Worthwhile, though, all of those are. We have already seen in the OCLC study called From Awareness to Funding in 2008 that so-called super supporters of libraries are not, in the main, users. We looked at some practical impacts of libraries in different kinds of communities, such as hospitals and corporations and neighborhoods and universities. We were reminded that we have to collect and tell our stories about the impacts of libraries. And we need to match these stories with the priorities of the people who are going to hear them from us. So, hospital administrators need to hear the evidence of the impact of medical libraries and librarians on diagnosis, on treatment, on advice given to a patient, because we know that hospital administrators' priority is the impact of all this on the work of their clinical teams. That selective telling of stories is one way we develop understandings and a way that we deepen our credibility within the relationships that we have. We need to pay attention to the perceptions of our library members, our decision makers, and our supporters. And in particular, we need to avoid making the mistake of thinking that these are all the same people. Because in fact, members and supporters have quite different perspectives. Finally, and most important, we know that there's a huge gap out there. There's a high regard that people have for libraries, but then there is the relative invisibility of libraries to decision makers. We are in urgent need of focused and informed advocacy to bridge that gap, to convert that high esteem into concrete policy and funding support for libraries in a future that can't be taken for granted. Libraries can and do die of moral support. So here's an overview of week 3. In order to do what I've been talking about, we need to know more about the decision-making environment, the factors that influence decision makers, and approaches for building relationships of influence. We address these questions this week. We're going to learn what research teaches us about exercising influence in practical situations. Our natural impulse to mobilize others to flood legislatures and decision-making circles with advocacy messages doesn't, all by itself, work very well. We're going to examine the important role of relationships in advocacy, and we're going to delve into proven ways of influencing others. It is much easier to influence someone if we already have established a relationship, and if we are informed and intentional about influencing. We know that human decision-making is not entirely rational. In fact, in many areas of our lives, the facts do not carry the day by themselves. So, what does carry the day? To answer this, we are going to look at the exercise of influence. We're going to look at the kinds of people who have disproportionate influence and who punch above their weight in giving ideas greater traction out there. We're going to note factors that drive support for libraries. We're going to review the 6 key principles of influence identified by the work of Robert Cialdini, a social psychologist. We can apply these principles ourselves in nurturing and building credible relationships over time. So throughout, you're going to recognize a continuing theme here, the indispensable value of being front and center, with our sleeves rolled up in the gatherings where the issues of our communities, regardless of what those communities are identified and the strategies created to address them. Before we begin, just a note about research. We see many references to advocacy in our library association literature and newspapers and through our social software and all our professional connections. However, most of the approaches that we read about are not systematically evaluated. They may not be harming us, but they may not be the best and most efficient use of our time and effort. In much of the professional literature, in fact, there is a blending of promotion for library use and advocacy for library support. This is not helpful when we are trying to identify the factors and the processes that strengthen library support, which is what we're really going for. There have also been many advocacy training programs out there, but actually very little in the way of systematic evaluation of these programs. Indeed, such research can be very hard to do because the results can play out over a long time. For the evidence to guide us in advocacy, we have to rely on sound research that is set in libraries and other nonprofit organizations. And we can draw on the writing of Robert Cialdini and Malcolm Gladwell about the dynamics of influence in relationship. I want to acknowledge in introducing this video about research a huge debt to two researchers who have mined the research and in fact contributed a great deal to it, and both of them are contributors to this course. Dr. Ken Haycock, who is leading a new library science program at the University of Southern California, is the first one I want to mention, and I'm going to summarize a review article that he has written that outlines the research that has been done. And secondly, Dr. Cheryl Stenstrom, who is on the faculty of San Jose State University, whose doctoral thesis, which was completed in 2012, focuses on advocacy for public libraries. And finally, some of the studies that are mentioned this week are available only from proprietary sources. Now, not every one of you is going to have access to scholarly databases. You are not required to read these studies, but we do provide the full reference to these studies and a few others for those of you who want to follow up.